It was a quiet Friday evening, and the streets were unusually calm. The golden light of the setting sun reflected off the windshields of parked cars, and a soft breeze carried the smell of autumn leaves through the air. Officer Miller had been patrolling this neighborhood for months. He knew every corner, every street, and almost every face that passed by. His shift had been uneventful so far, just the usual routine of checking traffic, making sure everything was in order, and keeping an eye out for any unusual activity. As he drove down the main road, his attention was caught by a sleek black SUV weaving through traffic. The driver seemed impatient, moving aggressively between lanes, almost hitting a few other vehicles in the process. Officer Miller's instincts kicked in. He turned on his lights and pulled the SUV over to the side of the road. He stepped out of his car, his boots crunching on the asphalt, and approached the driver's window. The driver rolled down the window with a calm expression, her eyes steady and focused. She was clearly annoyed but composed. Officer Miller tried to keep his tone professional, explaining the reason for the stop. He mentioned the weaving and the potential danger it caused. However, the driver responded sharply, questioning why she was being singled out. The conversation quickly grew tense. Her voice was firm, almost challenging, and Officer Miller felt his patience being tested. The exchange became heated, and in a moment of frustration, Officer Miller lost his composure. He raised his hand and struck her. The impact was immediate, and the sound of it seemed to echo in the quiet street. People nearby froze, staring in disbelief. The woman stepped back, holding her face, but she did not scream or yell. She remained surprisingly composed, her eyes narrowing slightly as she assessed the situation. Miller's heart raced. He had acted instinctively without thinking, and the weight of his actions hit him instantly. He expected the woman to react with anger, shouting or even fighting back. But she simply looked at him with an intense, unreadable expression. The street seemed to hold its breath, the silence almost unbearable. As the seconds ticked by, Officer Miller realized the gravity of what had just happened. He felt a wave of regret mixed with fear. His mind raced through the possible consequences. He could lose his job, face legal action, and his reputation could be destroyed in an instant. The woman's calm demeanor made him uneasy. There was something about her that suggested she was not an ordinary civilian. Bystanders began to gather, whispering to one another, their eyes wide with shock. Some took out their phones, recording the incident, while others simply watched, unsure of what to do. Officer Miller felt trapped, the weight of the crowd's attention pressing down on him. His training told him to stay calm, to control the situation, but his emotions were running high. The woman finally spoke, her voice steady and measured. She asked if he realized what he had done, and her tone carried an authority that made him pause. He nodded, words failing him for a moment. She didn't yell or call him names. She simply waited, watching him, making sure he understood the seriousness of the moment. Officer Miller took a step back, trying to regain his composure. He felt a mix of anger at himself and fear of the unknown. The woman's eyes didn't show fear or pain. They showed focus, control, and a quiet strength that unsettled him. It was clear she was not going to react like most people would in such a situation. He tried to speak, to explain, to apologize, but the words came out awkwardly, stumbling over themselves. The woman listened, her gaze unwavering. She finally told him to calm down and wait for backup. Her voice had a calm authority that made the crowd quiet down slightly. As he stepped back to call it in, Officer Miller couldn't shake the feeling that he was in over his head. This wasn't just another routine traffic stop. There was something about this woman that commanded respect, something that made him feel small despite his uniform and badge. He radioed for backup, his voice steady but his hands slightly trembling. Within minutes, other officers arrived, surrounding the scene. They quickly assessed the situation, separating Officer Miller from the woman. They asked questions, trying to understand what had happened. The woman cooperated fully, answering calmly and clearly, her demeanor professional. It was then that Officer Miller noticed her badge tucked in her wallet, glinting in the fading sunlight. His stomach sank as he realized who she was. The realization hit him like a punch. This wasn't an ordinary citizen. She was a federal agent. The weight of his actions became even heavier, the consequences now far more serious than he had imagined. The crowd watched silently as the officers spoke in low tones, clearly discussing how to handle the situation. Officer Miller felt a wave of shame and regret wash over him. He had acted impulsively, letting anger take control, and now he faced the reality of what that could mean. The woman, however, remained calm, composed, and professional. She did not escalate the situation. Instead, she maintained control, guiding the officers on how to proceed. As the scene unfolded, Officer Miller couldn't help but reflect on the choices that led him here. He thought about his training, his experience, and the countless situations he had handled before. He realized that in one moment of anger, he had jeopardized everything he had worked for. The street, once quiet and peaceful, now felt heavy with tension, the echoes of the incident lingering in the air. The woman finally spoke to him directly, her voice calm but firm. She explained that she understood his mistake, but emphasized the seriousness of his actions. She asked him to think carefully about how he would proceed, reminding him that restraint and control were crucial in his line of work. Officer Miller nodded, absorbing her words. He felt a mixture of fear, respect, and a determination to make amends. The gravity of the situation had settled over him, and he knew that this incident would change him forever. He realized that being a law enforcement officer was not just about enforcing rules. It was about understanding responsibility, restraint, and the human impact of every action. The evening grew darker, the golden light fading into the soft blues of twilight. The street lights flickered on, casting long shadows across the pavement. The crowd slowly dispersed, leaving Officer Miller and the woman in a quieter, more controlled environment. Backup officers continued to handle the scene, taking statements and ensuring that everything was documented accurately. In that moment, Officer Miller felt a deep sense of introspection. He understood that his actions had consequences, far beyond what he had initially imagined. The woman's calm authority had not only prevented the situation from escalating further, but had also forced him to confront his own behavior, in a way that few experiences ever could. He watched as she cooperated, fully with the other officers, answering questions with precision and clarity. It was clear she was highly trained, highly skilled, and completely in control. Her presence alone seemed to command respect, and Officer Miller felt the weight of his mistake more keenly than ever. As the night settled in, the first part of this story closed with Officer Miller standing there reflecting on the incident. He knew that the coming days would be filled with investigations, questions, and consequences. But in that quiet, tense moment, he also felt a glimmer of understanding, an awareness that every action carried weight and that restraint, patience, and professionalism were not just ideals but necessities. The evening had started as routine, but it had turned into a life-changing event, one that would leave a mark on him forever. The calm exterior of the woman, the intensity in her eyes, and the professionalism she displayed all combined to create a moment that Officer Miller would never forget. He had crossed a line, but he had also been confronted by an example of what true authority, skill, and composure looked like. The night air was cool against his skin, carrying the sounds of distant traffic and the occasional chirp of crickets, as he stood there, reflecting on the events that had unfolded in just a few tense minutes. The incident had ended, but the impact on his mind, his career, and his understanding of responsibility had only just begun. The minutes after the incident felt longer than hours. Officer Miller stood by his patrol car, hands shaking slightly, trying to regain some sense of control. He could hear the murmurs of the bystanders who had stayed, whispering among themselves about what they had seen. Some of them glanced at him with judgment in their eyes, while others seemed more curious than critical. The black SUV sat quietly a few feet away, the woman inside watching with calm intensity. There was no anger in her expression, only focus and patience, as if she were studying the situation in a way that he could not yet understand. Miller's fellow officers tried to approach him, offering quiet words of reassurance, but he barely heard them. His mind kept replaying the moment his fist had connected with her face, how quickly everything had escalated, how little control he had shown, and how utterly unprepared he had been for the consequences. Even though the crowd had mostly calmed down, he felt exposed, vulnerable, and painfully aware that his actions were now under scrutiny from multiple angles. The woman stepped out of her SUV with a steady, deliberate pace. Every movement was controlled, precise, and unhurried, and it only seemed to make him more nervous. She approached the officers and began speaking with them quietly. Her voice was calm and professional, yet carried an undeniable authority. Miller could hear snippets of the conversation, words like procedure, documentation, and reporting. Each word reminded him that this was no ordinary civilian. This was someone whose job depended on discipline, attention to detail, and a mastery of handling tense situations. He tried to take a deep breath and steady himself, but it felt almost impossible. His stomach churned and a knot tightened in his chest. What had he done? What would happen to his career? The woman's calmness seemed to contrast sharply with his inner turmoil. The contrast made him feel even smaller, more unprepared. He watched her closely as she spoke with the other officers, noting the way she maintained control without ever raising her voice or showing any sign of impatience. The officers eventually began taking statements from the bystanders, and Miller realized that every detail would be scrutinized. Every action, every word, every movement would be documented and analyzed. The thought made him feel a mix of dread and disbelief. He had never expected that a single moment of poor judgment could spiral into something so intense, so public. Yet here he was in the middle of it, forced to confront the reality of his mistake. The woman turned her attention to him, her eyes steady and unwavering. She asked him calmly to explain what had happened from his perspective. Her tone was not accusatory but firm, leaving no room for excuses. Miller tried to form the words, but they came out haltingly, stumbling over themselves as he attempted to convey the confusion, frustration, and momentary anger that had driven his actions. She listened carefully, nodding occasionally but never interrupting, never letting his nervousness sway her focus. As he spoke, he became aware of how tense he sounded, how vulnerable he must appear. He noticed the quiet authority she carried simply by standing there, observing and speaking with measured words. Her presence alone seemed to command respect from everyone around, including him. The realization that he had misjudged the situation and reacted impulsively weighed heavily on him. Each word he spoke felt like it might carry consequences, and he could sense the seriousness in the way the other officers were documenting everything. After listening to him, she spoke again, explaining the next steps. Officer Miller felt a mixture of relief and fear. Relief that she wasn't immediately demanding charges. Fear because her calm professionalism only reminded him of the gravity of what he had done. She asked for his cooperation and assured him that things would be handled through proper channels. Every word carried weight, a subtle reminder that actions had consequences, and that he needed to take responsibility for his choices. As the officers guided the bystanders to leave, Miller was left with the woman and a few of the other officers. She began to explain the process of what would happen next, outlining the report, the internal investigation, and the review that would follow. It was clear she was experienced in handling situations like this, but her demeanor remained approachable and calm. She wasn't seeking revenge. She was enforcing a sense of order and accountability, teaching a lesson without unnecessary escalation. Miller tried to focus on her words, trying to absorb the procedural explanation, but his mind kept drifting back to the moment he struck her. The embarrassment, the shock, and the sudden awareness of the situation's seriousness clung to him like a weight. He had never felt so exposed in his professional life. Every training exercise, every routine patrol, every encounter with civilians had prepared him for many things, but nothing had prepared him for this level of personal accountability in such a public moment. The woman finished explaining and looked directly at him. Her gaze was firm but not hostile, holding a mixture of authority, understanding, and an unspoken challenge. Miller understood the silent message. He needed to reflect, to learn, and to grow from this moment. The weight of that realization pressed down on him, mingling with the embarrassment and anxiety he already felt. Time seemed to stretch as he stood there, absorbing the situation. He could hear the distant hum of traffic, the faint rustle of leaves, and the occasional murmur of officers coordinating behind him. Yet in that moment, everything else faded into the background. All that mattered was the gravity of his actions and the presence of the woman who had managed to maintain control in a situation he had allowed to spiral out of control. She then took a step closer, her voice softer but still firm, offering guidance on remaining professional and composed during the investigation. Miller felt a strange mix of relief and continued tension. Her approach was firm enough to remind him of the seriousness of his mistake, but also careful not to escalate the situation further. It was a lesson in authority, professionalism, and self-control, something he knew he needed more of. As the night deepened, the streetlights flickered on, casting long, soft shadows on the pavement. The crowd had dispersed, leaving the street quieter and calmer, yet the intensity of the earlier moments lingered. Officer Miller watched as the woman returned to her SUV briefly, then stepped back to continue discussions with the other officers. She moved with purpose and confidence, handling every detail with precision, ensuring that the situation was fully under control. Miller's mind kept replaying the incident, analyzing every action, every thought, every missed opportunity to remain calm. He felt the need to make amends, to learn from this, to become better at managing his temper and his responsibilities. The woman's professionalism had highlighted the contrast between reacting impulsively and acting with measured composure. The lesson was clear: in moments of tension, control and patience mattered more than quick action. As the investigation process began to take shape, the woman coordinated with other officers to gather all necessary information, making sure that all procedures were followed correctly. Her calm efficiency continued to impress Miller. He realized that her ability to stay composed under pressure was something he aspired to, but had fallen short of in that moment. He felt a mix of admiration, humility, and a strong desire to improve himself. Finally, she addressed him one last time that evening, giving instructions on cooperating with internal affairs and reminding him to remain professional throughout the process. Her words were direct but not harsh, a mixture of mentorship and accountability. Miller absorbed every word, understanding the seriousness of the situation and the need to respond appropriately in the coming days. As she returned to her SUV to leave, the tension in the air slowly dissipated. The officers who had gathered began to tidy up the scene, and the street gradually returned to its quiet state. Miller remained by his patrol car for a moment longer, reflecting on the evening's events. The adrenaline that had surged through him earlier now subsided, leaving a mix of exhaustion, contemplation, and a profound awareness of the lessons he had just received. He realized that this incident would change him, not just professionally but personally. It was a stark reminder of the importance of self-control, professionalism, and understanding the potential consequences of every action. The calm authority of the woman had turned a chaotic and potentially destructive situation into a lesson in patience, composure, and respect for procedure. As the night sky darkened, filled with stars just beginning to appear, Miller made a silent promise to himself. He would learn from this. He would become more disciplined, more aware, and more controlled. The evening had started as a routine patrol and a seemingly minor traffic stop, but it had evolved into a defining moment in his life, one that would remain with him forever. The lessons learned were clear, the impact undeniable, and the path forward now lined with reflection, growth, and the understanding that actions, no matter how brief, could shape the course of a career and a life. The following morning, Officer Miller woke up feeling a heaviness he had never experienced before. The events of the previous night played on repeat in his mind. Every detail, from the moment the SUV had cut him off to the instant his fist connected, felt vivid, almost tangible. The memory of her calm, controlled expression haunted him the most. He could still feel the weight of her gaze, the authority it carried, and the silent message that he had crossed a line he could not easily undo. As he got ready for his day, he kept thinking about the calls he would receive. Internal affairs would be involved, his superiors would demand a full report, and there was no telling how long the investigation would take. Each thought made his stomach twist, and he tried to mentally prepare for what awaited him. But nothing could erase the nagging sense of dread that had settled deep in his chest. By mid-morning, Miller found himself in the police station, sitting quietly in a small, fluorescent-lit office. The hum of computers and the occasional ring of telephones filled the background, but he felt disconnected from it all. His mind was consumed with the previous night, the reactions of the bystanders, and most of all, the woman. He hadn't stopped thinking about her professionalism, the calm strength she exuded, and the undeniable authority that had kept the situation from spiraling further. An officer knocked gently on the door and stepped inside, holding a folder of documents. Miller nodded for them to come in. The officer handed him the folder and he opened it, revealing reports, witness statements, and procedural notes. His heart sank as he realized how closely everything would be examined. Every angle, every moment, every word spoken would be reviewed. He flipped through the pages, each one a reminder of the incident and its consequences. Just then, a senior investigator arrived, introducing themselves in a calm but firm tone. They explained that there would be an official meeting with the FBI agent involved, that statements needed to be recorded, and that Miller's account of the events would be compared carefully to the witnesses and the agent's report. Miller nodded, trying to appear calm, but inside he felt a storm of anxiety and self-recrimination. Hours later, he was led to a conference room where the woman was already waiting. She was dressed in a simple suit, her posture upright and her expression neutral but commanding. Miller felt a jolt of nervousness as he approached, realizing once again the magnitude of the situation. Her calm presence made him acutely aware of his own tension and the need to remain composed. She greeted him professionally, without any hint of hostility, and invited him to sit. Her voice was steady, clear and firm, and she began by explaining that she understood the incident had been sudden and unexpected. She acknowledged his position as an officer and reminded him that while emotions could run high, restraint and control were vital in their line of work. Miller listened intently, nodding, feeling both relief and pressure at the same time. She then asked him to describe the events from his perspective. Miller recounted everything, starting from the traffic stop, the cutting off, the exchange of words, and the moment his patience snapped. He spoke carefully, aware that each word mattered, that the clarity and honesty of his account could influence how the investigation proceeded. She listened without interruption, her eyes focused, noting every detail, but her tone remained calm, professional, and non-judgmental. Once he finished, she asked questions to clarify certain points, probing gently but thoroughly. Each question felt like a test, not of his knowledge, but of his ability to remain truthful, accountable, and composed. Miller found himself reflecting deeply on his actions, realizing for the first time the full weight of his lapse in judgment. He understood that one impulsive act could undermine years of training and experience, and he felt a mixture of shame, determination, and a desire to make things right. The conversation then shifted to the procedural side of things. She explained the importance of accurate documentation, the necessity of cooperation with internal investigations, and how the incident would be reviewed. Miller absorbed the details, feeling both overwhelmed and grateful for her clarity. Her approach was firm but fair, holding him accountable while also offering a path forward. He realized that she was guiding him, not just addressing the incident, but teaching a lesson in professionalism, restraint, and responsibility. As the meeting continued, the woman shared some of her own experiences, carefully illustrating situations where quick thinking, patience, and control had been critical. Her stories were measured, focused on learning rather than criticism, and they subtly conveyed the values that defined her career. Miller felt a growing respect for her, not only as a federal agent but as someone who had mastered the ability to stay composed under extreme pressure. Her calm authority contrasted sharply with the chaos of his own reactions, and he felt the weight of the lesson pressing on him. When the meeting concluded, Miller was left with a sense of both relief and renewed anxiety. Relief that the woman had handled the situation professionally and without immediate hostility, and anxiety because the investigation was still ongoing and the consequences were not yet clear. He walked back to his office, the folder of documents clutched tightly in his hands, replaying every moment of the discussion, analyzing his words, his tone, and the responses he had given. Over the next few days, Miller worked closely with internal affairs and his superiors to provide detailed reports and answer questions. Each session was meticulous, focusing on every aspect of the incident. He reflected on his behavior, acknowledging where he had failed and taking responsibility for his actions. The process was humbling, challenging, and illuminating. It forced him to confront not just the specific incident, but the deeper implications of how he reacted under stress. Meanwhile, he learned more about the woman from colleagues and reports. She was highly respected in her field, known for her sharp instincts, composure, and ability to handle high-pressure situations with grace. Knowing this made him even more aware of the gravity of his actions and the potential consequences. The more he understood her background, the more he appreciated the professionalism she had displayed in a moment that could have escalated disastrously. One afternoon, Miller received a formal meeting request from her office. He entered the room, his nerves taut, but found her waiting with the same calm composure he had seen before. She greeted him with a professional nod and began by explaining that she had reviewed all the statements, witness accounts, and the procedural notes. Miller listened, holding his breath, aware that this discussion could determine the next steps in his career. She spoke with clarity, outlining both the seriousness of his actions and the procedural aspects of how the situation would be managed. She emphasized accountability and professionalism, and the need for reflection and personal growth. Her tone was firm but not punitive, conveying that while the incident was serious, there was an opportunity to learn and improve. Miller felt a mix of relief and continued nervousness. The weight of responsibility was clear, but so was the possibility for redemption. Throughout the conversation, Miller noticed the subtle ways in which her authority and composure influenced him. Her calm voice, measured gestures, and unwavering focus created an atmosphere of control that contrasted with his own earlier panic. He realized that the true power of her position was not in the badge or title, but in her ability to remain composed, think clearly, and guide others even in tense situations. The lesson was profound, and he felt a shift in his own mindset, a recognition of how he needed to approach his responsibilities moving forward. By the end of the meeting, Miller left with a clearer understanding of the path ahead. He knew that cooperation, reflection, and commitment to growth were essential. The incident had been a harsh wake-up call, a moment that could define the trajectory of his career. Yet it also offered an opportunity to learn, improve, and demonstrate accountability. The woman's professionalism had set a standard that he now aspired to reach. Back at his office, Miller reflected on everything he had learned. The days since the incident had been a mixture of tension, reflection, and learning. The initial shock and fear had slowly been replaced by a sense of purpose, a commitment to becoming more disciplined, thoughtful, and controlled. He realized that the incident had not only tested him, but also provided an invaluable lesson in professionalism, composure, and accountability. As the week came to a close, Miller began to approach his work with renewed focus. He attended briefings, documented reports, and engaged with colleagues, all while keeping the lessons from the incident in mind. The woman's influence lingered, her calm authority serving as a guide for how he could improve his own behavior. He felt a growing determination to learn from the experience, to ensure that he would never repeat the mistakes of that evening, and to prove to himself and others that he could handle his responsibilities with maturity and control. By the end of the week, Miller had taken significant steps to reflect, improve, and regain confidence in his role. The incident with the woman in the black SUV remained vivid in his memory, a constant reminder of the importance of self-control, professionalism, and accountability. Her calm, authoritative presence had not only de-escalated a tense moment, but also taught him a lesson that would shape his career and approach to law enforcement for years to come. Each day as he walked the streets in his uniform, he carried the knowledge that one impulsive act could have far-reaching consequences, and that true authority was measured not by force but by composure, clarity, and the ability to guide others through challenging situations. Officer Miller's days following the incident became a careful balance of reflection, duty, and uncertainty. Each morning, he woke with a knot in his stomach, knowing that he had to face the ongoing scrutiny. Even routine patrols felt different. Every interaction, every glance from a civilian reminded him of the event. The knowledge that an FBI agent had been involved made the situation feel heavier than any other disciplinary matter he had faced in his career. The weight of potential consequences pressed on him, yet he knew he had to carry on and remain professional. Internal affairs kept a close watch, requesting frequent updates, detailed reports, and personal reflections on the incident. Miller complied, answering questions honestly and thoroughly, taking responsibility for his actions and demonstrating a willingness to learn. The process was exhausting, both mentally and emotionally, but it forced him to confront not only the incident itself, but also his habits, impulses, and approach to law enforcement. Meanwhile, the woman's presence remained in his mind. He had not seen her in person again, but he had heard from colleagues about her professionalism and the respect she commanded in her field. That knowledge fueled a mixture of admiration and nervousness within him. She had not used her position to punish him immediately, but the mere fact that she had handled the situation with composure, while he had lost control, left a lasting impression. Every detail he remembered, The firmness of her voice, the calm in her eyes, the way she maintained control, became a measure of the standard he wanted to reach. One afternoon, he was called into a formal meeting with his supervisor and an internal affairs officer. The room was quiet, the hum of fluorescent lights the only background noise. Miller sat across from them, his posture straight but tense, mentally preparing himself for the discussion. He handed over the notes he had prepared, detailing every step of the incident and his reflections on what he had done wrong and how he planned to improve. His supervisor spoke first, acknowledging Miller's honesty and cooperation. The tone was measured, emphasizing the seriousness of the incident but also recognizing that Miller had demonstrated accountability. The internal affairs officer followed, outlining the next steps: mandatory training sessions, conflict resolution exercises, and participation in workshops designed to strengthen decision-making under stress. The process was thorough, but Miller understood that it was meant to ensure both accountability and growth. Over the next few weeks, Miller immersed himself in these programs. Each session required reflection, discussion, and practical exercises. He learned techniques to manage stress, control impulses, and communicate effectively in high-pressure situations. These lessons were both challenging and humbling, forcing him to confront parts of himself he had previously overlooked. Each day brought a new understanding of responsibility, restraint, and the ripple effect of even brief actions. During this time, he occasionally caught glimpses of the woman in reports and communications. Her professionalism continued to stand out, not as a source of intimidation, but as a model of how to maintain composure and handle situations with skill and authority. Her influence, though indirect, continued to shape his approach to his work. He found himself striving to emulate her calm confidence, to apply the lessons he was learning, and to avoid repeating past mistakes. The media began to take note of the incident, though not in a sensationalized way. Reports focused on the professionalism of law enforcement and the importance of restraint, highlighting the lessons learned rather than the confrontation itself. Miller followed the coverage carefully, feeling a mix of embarrassment and gratitude that the situation had been handled responsibly. It reminded him that his actions were always observed, both within the department and by the public, and reinforced the importance of maintaining control in all interactions. One morning, Miller received an unexpected call from the woman's office. She requested a brief meeting, emphasizing that it would be professional and focused on reviewing the progress of his reflections and training. He felt a surge of nerves, but also a sense of opportunity to demonstrate his growth. The meeting was scheduled for later that afternoon. When he arrived, she greeted him with a firm but professional handshake. Her presence was as commanding as ever, yet her demeanor was composed and approachable. They sat across from each other, and she began by asking about the training sessions, the workshops, and the progress he had made in managing stress and communication. Miller spoke honestly, detailing the techniques he had learned, the reflections he had made, and the practical changes he was implementing in his daily work. She listened attentively, nodding occasionally, her expression calm and neutral. Her questions were precise, probing his understanding and commitment to improvement. Miller felt the weight of her attention, but also a sense of guidance, as if she were leading him toward a higher standard, rather than punishing him for past mistakes. It was a powerful reminder of the responsibility he carried, not only to himself and his colleagues, but also to the community he served. The discussion shifted to practical scenarios, and she asked how he would respond to similar situations in the future. Miller answered thoughtfully, applying the lessons he had learned and demonstrating a level of reflection and self-awareness that had been absent in the original incident. Her feedback was constructive, emphasizing both the areas where he had improved and the aspects that still required attention. Each word reinforced the importance of discipline, patience, and professional conduct. After the meeting, Miller left with a renewed sense of purpose. He realized that the incident had transformed from a moment of failure into an opportunity for growth. The woman's approach, her calm authority, and her professional guidance had turned a negative experience into a profound learning moment. He understood that true strength in law enforcement was not measured by force or aggression, but by the ability to remain composed, make thoughtful decisions, and uphold accountability. Back on patrol, Miller began to notice subtle changes in himself. He approached interactions with a greater sense of patience, listening more carefully and responding with measured words. He applied the techniques he had learned in training, managing stress and controlling impulses. Each interaction, no matter how minor, became an opportunity to reinforce the lessons from the incident and to demonstrate the professional growth he was committed to achieving. The woman remained a quiet but constant influence in his mind. Her professionalism, calm demeanor, and unwavering focus had become a benchmark for the standard he now strived to meet. While he never saw her again in person during this period, the impact of her guidance and the lessons learned from the incident continued to shape his approach to law enforcement. Interactions with the public and personal reflection. Weeks turned into months, and the official investigation gradually reached its conclusion. Miller's cooperation, accountability, and progress in training were recognized by his superiors and internal affairs. The formal report acknowledged the incident, highlighted the corrective measures he had taken, and emphasized the importance of restraint and professional conduct. While the event remained a serious matter, it was clear that Miller had used the experience as a turning point for growth and reflection. One evening, after completing another patrol, Miller sat in his car reflecting on the journey. The incident that had begun with a sudden moment of anger had evolved into a profound lesson in accountability, professionalism, and personal growth. He thought about the woman, her calm authority, and the way she had guided the situation without aggression or hostility. The memory of her composure remained vivid, a lasting reminder of the power of patience, reflection, and self-control. As he drove through the quiet streets, he understood that this experience had reshaped not only his career, but also his perspective on responsibility and authority. Every action carried weight, every decision had consequences, and the ability to remain composed under pressure was invaluable. He realized that the incident, while difficult and humbling, had provided a rare opportunity to learn from a true example of professionalism and to apply those lessons in every aspect of his life. Miller's journey through the aftermath of the incident was not easy, but it was transformative. The lessons he had learned, the training he had undertaken, and the guidance he had received from the woman had reshaped his approach to law enforcement. The impact of her calm, professional demeanor and her insistence on accountability had become a guiding force. He knew that he would carry these lessons forward, ensuring that the mistakes of that night would never be repeated, and that the standard she represented would remain a benchmark for his own conduct. Months passed since the incident, and Officer Miller's life had changed in ways he had never imagined. The days of fear, tension, and uncertainty slowly gave way to reflection, personal growth, and a renewed commitment to his work. Every time he put on his uniform, he carried with him the lessons learned from that evening, the memory of the woman, and the knowledge that even a single moment of poor judgment could have profound consequences. He had become more aware of his actions, more patient in his interactions with civilians, and more focused on maintaining calm in high-pressure situations. The training, guidance, and internal reflections had reshaped his approach to law enforcement. The fear and anxiety he once felt had been replaced with a sense of responsibility and a commitment to uphold professionalism in every situation. One afternoon, Miller received an unexpected call from the woman's office. She had requested a brief meeting to discuss his progress and to provide additional guidance. He felt a mixture of nerves and anticipation as he prepared for the meeting, knowing that this encounter would mark another important moment in his professional journey. When he arrived, she greeted him with her usual calm, composed demeanor. Her presence, steady and authoritative, brought back memories of that first confrontation. However, this time there was no tension, no fear, only a mutual understanding of professionalism. They sat down and she began by acknowledging the progress he had made. She noted his commitment to training, his reflective approach, and the practical changes he had implemented in his daily work. Miller listened carefully, absorbing her words. Her recognition was not just professional acknowledgement. It felt like a validation of his efforts to learn and improve. She emphasized the importance of continuing this approach, reminding him that growth was ongoing and that the lessons from that night would remain relevant throughout his career. Her tone was firm but encouraging, a blend of accountability and mentorship that left a lasting impression on him. The conversation turned to practical advice for handling difficult situations in the future. She shared strategies for maintaining composure, de-escalating tense encounters, and making thoughtful decisions under pressure. Miller asked questions, seeking to understand not just the techniques but the mindset behind them. She explained that true authority was not about force or intimidation, but about clarity, calmness, and the ability to guide others effectively. Each piece of advice reinforced the lessons he had learned, providing him with tools to navigate future challenges with confidence and professionalism. After the meeting, Miller returned to his duties with a renewed sense of purpose. He began to notice subtle improvements in his interactions with colleagues and the community. His communication was clearer, his responses more measured, and his ability to manage stress had grown significantly. He felt a quiet pride in the progress he had made, knowing that it had been achieved through self-reflection, discipline, and the guidance of someone who had demonstrated the highest standards of professionalism. As weeks turned into months, the incident became a reference point in his mind, a reminder of both vulnerability and opportunity. He understood that mistakes could happen, but the way one responded, learned, and grew from those mistakes defined the trajectory of a career and the measure of character. The woman's influence, though indirect, continued to shape his actions, providing a benchmark for calm authority and professional conduct. One evening, after a particularly challenging shift, Miller found himself reflecting on the journey he had been through. The incident, which had initially felt like a disaster, now appeared as a turning point in his life. The fear, shame, and anxiety he had experienced had been transformed into lessons of accountability, resilience, and growth. He realized that the woman had not only de-escalated a tense situation, but had also provided a living example of the qualities he aspired to embody. He thought about the impact on his colleagues as well. His transformation had not gone unnoticed. Supervisors had commented on his improved composure, and fellow officers noted his increased patience and clarity in decision-making. The incident had become a silent lesson for everyone around him, a demonstration that even in moments of failure, there was an opportunity for reflection and growth. As the night sky stretched above him, Miller felt a sense of closure and understanding. He had faced the consequences of his actions, embraced the lessons, and emerged more capable and confident. The memory of the woman, once a symbol of fear and authority, had become a guiding presence, reminding him of the importance of patience, reflection, and professionalism. In his daily work, he applied these lessons consistently. Traffic stops, community interactions, and even routine patrols became opportunities to practice restraint, communicate clearly, and make thoughtful decisions. Each encounter reinforced the principles he had learned, embedding them into his professional habits and mindset. Over time, Miller realized that the incident had done more than teach him about professionalism. It had reshaped his understanding of responsibility. Every action, every choice carried weight, and the ability to remain calm and composed was not just a personal skill, but a public duty. The woman's example had shown him the power of measured authority, and he now understood that influence and respect were earned through composure and thoughtful action rather than force or aggression. Months later, during a department meeting, Miller shared aspects of his experience with colleagues in a training session focused on conflict resolution and stress management. He spoke candidly about the incident, the lessons learned, and the ongoing importance of reflection and growth. His words were met with respect and interest, as officers recognized the value of learning from real-life experiences. The incident had transformed from a moment of personal failure into a teaching moment for the entire department. Miller continued to patrol the streets with renewed focus, carrying with him the knowledge that every encounter mattered. The lessons from that night, the guidance from the woman, and the reflection on his own actions had created a foundation for a more responsible, thoughtful, and professional approach to law enforcement. He had learned that true strength lay not in reaction, but in restraint, clarity, and the ability to guide others with calm authority. Even as time passed, the memory of that evening remained vivid, a constant reminder of the lessons he had learned. He often thought about how a single moment of anger had the power to alter the course of his career and personal growth. Yet he also recognized that the way he responded afterward, the reflection, the training, the commitment to improvement, had the power to redefine that moment entirely. In the quiet moments of his shifts, as he drove through neighborhoods and observed the community he served, Miller felt a sense of fulfillment. He had grown not only as an officer but as a person, understanding the weight of responsibility, the importance of composure, and the impact of professional conduct. The experience had been challenging, humbling, and transformative, leaving an indelible mark on his life. By the time a year had passed since the incident, Officer Miller had fully embraced the lessons and changes it had inspired. His career continued, strengthened by reflection, discipline, and the example set by the woman who had once confronted him. He understood that mistakes were part of life, but the willingness to learn, grow, and improve defined his journey. The incident, once a moment of fear and shame, had become a cornerstone of his personal and professional development. As he walked the streets in his uniform, Miller carried with him a quiet confidence, an awareness of the responsibility he bore, and the knowledge that every action mattered. He had faced the consequences, embraced the lessons, and emerged more capable, professional, and mindful. The woman's calm authority, her professionalism, and the guidance she had provided had not only helped him navigate the immediate aftermath, but it also set a standard that he would carry forward for the rest of his career. In the end, Officer Miller realized that the true impact of that night was not in the confrontation itself, but in the transformation it sparked. The incident had tested him, taught him, and ultimately guided him toward becoming the kind of officer he aspired to be. Patient, composed, reflective, and committed to serving his community with professionalism and integrity.